Cecil Rhodes, on February 5th, 1891, formed a secret society. It was based upon circles within circles. According to William Stead, the English journalist of 1849 and 1912, said that the program was designed to have like-thinking people in, quote, 3,000 of them in the prime of their life, scattered over the world, mathematically selected to promote the founders' purposes, world government. Frank Adelot, who devoted a whole study about Rhodes Scholars, admits they, quote, occupy prominent positions in the Council on Foreign Relations, the World Peace Foundation, and the United Nations. The Fabian Socialist in England accelerated the plan for world government. Oxford was under the domination of the Fabian Socialist Society, where the Rhodes Trust sent its scholars to be indoctrinated to be part of an international socialist government. Frank Adelot, writing about the Rhodes Scholars, said if one were to assimilate the material from Oxford, one would return to the United States a citizen of the world. An indication of their patience and their deceit of this phase of their manipulation can be seen by their name, named after Fabius, who was a Roman general who used gradualism. Secondly, you'll see that their very emblem up in the right-hand corner on a stained glass window, which is reproduced, is a wolf in sheep's clothing. The American branch of the Fabian Society was the League for Industrial Democracy, changing later in the 1940s to the Americans for Democratic Action. Reagan was personally donating his money earned by the second year of the founding of the Americans for Democratic Action in the United States. For 150 years in America, there has existed a secret society that acts as a controlling brain for such groups as the Trilateralists, the Bilderbergers, the Atlantic Union, and the Council on Foreign Relations. Yale is the primary spawning grounds. It is the president of Yale, Kingman Brewster, who said, quote, our national purpose should be to abolish our nationality. Of course, he is selling world government. Kingman Brewster is also a member of the Council on Foreign Relations. Woodrow Wilson and his Rasputin Colonel Mandel House were wholly dedicated to the cause of world government. After World War I, Wilson used his total efforts, his last efforts, pushing the United States Senate to join the League of Nations, which was a project of the wealthy, the international bankers, and the secret societies that they sponsored. For some background data on these secret societies, some excellent books have survived periodic purchase. A number of Nesta Webster books have been handsomely and inexpensively reproduced. A fascinating web of money and power has very, very much to do with the America in the 1980s. Today, only 1 in 1,000 can identify the Council on Foreign Relations or the Trilateral Commission, and 90% of those are misinformed or have no information other than having heard its name. Whether you end up loving them, opposing them, or being indifferent, one had best learn about them or be resigned to having lived in the 20th century, not knowing what it's all about. One of the best sources is Free, a foundation assembled by one man of courage that has faced incredible odds. Don't leave this room without having a copy of this Trilateral Connection. It will allow you to run circles around PhDs in political science. U.S. Senator Barry Goldwater, in a book called With No Apologies, wrote about the Trilateral and Council on Foreign Relations activities. There have been only a handful of people in Congress that have disclosed to the American people this type of information. Ronald Reagan, before he was elected, said the book was, quote, required reading for those who wanted to know the inner workings of the political world, unquote. Senator Barry Goldwater writes, quote, the Council on Foreign Relations is a vehicle for multinational consolidation of the commercial and banking interest by seizing control of the political government of the United States, unquote. And about the Trilateral Commission, he writes, quote, it's a skillful, coordinated effort to seize and control and consolidate the 4 centers of power, political, monetary, intellectual, and ecclesiastical, unquote. A wider number of Americans were catching on to the conspiratorial networks inside the United States. Carter, who campaigned against the establishment as an independent, actually became a Rockefeller surrogate. Before the election, his campaign aide, his press aide, said that they would not appoint such people as Brzezinski or Vance. And of course they did just that. Carter was a product of the Trilateral Commission. He selected as vice president Bilderberger Walter Mondale. The Carter team was used to prepare the United States government internationally and domestically for world government. He appointed 19 top operatives into his cabinet from those organizations. Although still small in number, by 1980 more Americans were alert to the conspiratorial networks of the Council on Foreign Relations and the Trilateral Commission. After Reagan lost in Iowa, he decided he would harness the Americans that are more aware. He recognized and campaigned against the Trilateral and Council on Foreign Relations in New Hampshire and Florida, and he charged that Carter had 19 of these operatives in his cabinet, and Ronald Reagan promised to go in a different direction. The head of those two powerful organizations is David Rockefeller, the head of the Council on Foreign Relations and the Trilateral Commission. While the super rich dump their fortunes into huge tax-exempt foundations, they don't prohibit themselves from being involved in politics or opinion-making. The billion-dollar backbone of much of America's activities reside in the larger foundations established by these wealthy. Of the 77 foundations of over 100 million each, almost half were interlocking trustees belonging to more than one foundation. Basically, only 31 organizations were the recipients, both of which are policy planning and opinion making. Of those with the greatest number of interlocks are Rockefeller, Carnegie, Ford, and Russell Sage. The Ford Foundation is headed by Franklin A. Thomas, a member of the Council on Foreign Relations. Hedley Donovan is another trustee, a Rhodes Scholar, a member of the Council on Foreign Relations, and he is also a trustee in the Carnegie Foundation, one example of an interlock. Robert McNamara is a member. He's also a member of the Secret Bilderberger Society and also head of the World Bank. The World Bank is already in place for their world government. Ford Foundation money goes to the American Friends and the insidious Aspen Institute, both of which are working to destroy the American institutions and reconstruct them so that will fit into a world government. Monies go to the Fund for the Republic and the American Friends. Paradoxically, the powerful elite money surfaces in so-called anti-establishment groups here in Santa Cruz. Very few of the revolutionaries believe that they are fighting the establishment, are in fact guided and directed and efforting towards world government. The acceptance of blue ribbon committees by the American people was a major relinquishment of a very valuable part of the American system. Bilderberger Gerald Ford was selected to serve on the Warren Commission, which was a blue ribbon committee that replaced the legitimate investigating bodies that should have reported to the American people the facts concerning the assassination of our American president. The Fund for the Republic is an extension of the Ford Foundation. Some huge sums of money have been delivered to the American Friends Service Committee. The director of the Fund for the Republic was Ed Levy, a member of the National Lawyers Guild, cited by Congress as, quote, the foremost legal bulwark of the Communist Party. Gerald Ford's first choice for Attorney General was Ed Levy, and for Vice President, as you all know, was Nelson Rockefeller. The Ford Foundation-supported American Friends Service Committee was first organized in 1917 as a truly pacifist organization. By the early 1920s, Jessica Smith of the American Friends hierarchy was traveling between the United States and the Soviet Union as liaison. Both of her husbands, John Abt and Harold Ware, were Soviet spies. Clarence Pickett, in 1929, assumed full control of the American Friends Service Committee, a Quaker organization. He was a member of the Emergency Civil Liberties Committee and the Russian-American Institute, which our Congress declared was specializing in pro-Soviet propaganda. For years across the country, The American Friends, Marxists and Socialists, have traveled and trekked to a Asilomar Conference Center in Monterey to set their plans to communize America. The conference center is set in the beautiful Monterey Bay, and the facilities are first class. The Quakers. Marilyn Patton, the wife of the county supervisor in Santa Cruz, secretary for the American Friends Service Committee in this county, organizing and injecting bits of Marxism under the guise of peace. The Center for American Activities and Studies is a front to support communist terrorists in El Salvador, those blowing up buses, bridges, and communication links. The Latin American bookstore's name is Venceremos, which is a rallying cry of Che and Fidel Castro, which literally translate to "We shall overcome." The title from that song was generated from the communist Highlander folk school, is now sung by the deluded marchers, most of which know not what they do. As we see by the signs at the Quakers Center, the land is shared by the Quakers and the supporters of the American terrorist, CASA. They have more than shared facilities in common. The facilities consist of hostels, kitchens, and other barracks. The Highlander Research and Educational Center was formerly known as the Communist Highlander Folk School in Tennessee. Trilateralist Andrew Young received his training at the Highlander School. The International Union of Mine, Mill, and Smelter Workers sent monies to the school. Trilateralist Andrew Young lived rent-free in the offices of the International. The Subversive Activities Control Board found the union to be communist infiltrated. Communist organizer Hunter Pitts Odell and National Communist Party committeemen worked for Andrew Young at the Dorsher Center in Georgia, headquartered at the Mine, Mill, and Smelter International. Hunter Pitts Odell has been Jesse Jackson's aide for the last decade. Martin Luther King is seen here at the Highlander Folk School with the communist Abner Berry, a member of the Communist Central Committee, and Miles Horton, the director of the school. Jesse Jackson is seen here with Bilderberger Mondale and Council on Foreign Relations trilateralist Alan Cranston. Jackson inherited the Marxist network organized under Martin Luther King. The multi-billion-dollar Ford Foundation, true to the word, is altering the United States so that it can be comfortably merged with that of the Soviet Union. Here is an example of the United Front technique, which includes the NAACP, the National Lawyers Guild, the American Friends, the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom, all working together to alter the American system so that it can comfortably merge with that of the Soviet Union. The Carnegie Foundation, over 50% of its directors are members of the Council on Foreign Relations. Communist convicted spy Alger Hiss used to head the foundation. Hiss's leadership was followed by Bilderberger Joseph E. Johnson, who financed a 170-page plan for the United Nations invasion of South Africa. The communist clenched fist is a symbol of those forces Bilderberger Joseph E. Johnson supports. Joseph E. Johnson is a trustee at the insidious Aspen Institute. The Carnegie Endowment for International Peace funnels money to the NAACP and the National Lawyers Guild, the foremost legal bulwark of the Communist Party. At the Resource Center for Nonviolence in Santa Cruz, according to their own literature, shows that their staff is interchangeable with the Fellowship of Reconciliation. It also mentions that it's interchangeable with the War Resisters League. The building houses the Garland Peace Library, according to their own information. The Resource Center for Nonviolence is a major transmission belt for Marxist and communist propaganda. The Last Epidemic is a fright movie to disarm the United States. It was produced by Eric and Ian Tierman. The Resource Center also provides a film by Paul Jacobs, who was a Trotskyite and a member of the Young Communist League. They also promoted the speaker George Lakey, a member of the War Resisters League, who agitated on behalf of the Marxist Black Panthers. The Resource Center has contacts with violent pro-Marxist black nationalists. This fall's issue of the official UCSC Kiwanis shows several examples of the communist clenched fist salute. The Fellowship of Reconciliation, in which they have interchangeable membership with, established the Brookwood Labor College from monies from the Garland Fund. The Garland Fund was a major source of funding for the Communist Party enterprises. And in their brochure, they said, instead of attacking Soviet Russia, we are anxious to appreciate their contributions and to build here in this section of the world an order that has all the values of the one being created in the Soviet Union, unquote. The Resource Center fanatically attempts to talk Americans into disarmament and into the surrender syndrome, not of the communist terrorists in Cambodia, Nicaragua, and Afghanistan, but just the United States. They praise Gandhi and Marx. They use a film, The Last Epidemic, as a war scare at the Resource Center to build up the hysteria and to reach for the emotional handles in order to manipulate and paralyze the American people into inaction. Their conclusion almost always is to strip America and deposit the powers that were once reserved to the American people into the United Nations or a global world government. The Commonwealth College in Mena, Arkansas, was controlled by the People's Institute for Applied Religion. Its purpose was to use religion, comparing texts taken from the New Testaments and Karl Marx. The college was run by Miles Horton. Miles Horton also ran the Communist Highlander Folk School, where we saw Martin Luther King sitting alongside Abner Berry of the Communist Party. It's the same school that had trained trilateralist Andrew Young. Horton was brought here to Santa Cruz by the Resource Center for Nonviolence. Where the Marxists can't destroy religion, they use it, working their symbols into religious symbols and vice versa. The peace signs ultimately revert to the communist clenched fist. The clenched fist is used by the communists throughout the world. The communists marching under the guise of peace, environment, and civil rights, or to support communist terrorism abroad, such as in El Salvador, use the clenched fist. This is Jesse Jackson, who led the recent march on Washington, and whose assistant was Hunter Pitts O'Dell. Jackson campaigned for Ronald Reagan. Ronald Reagan agreed to name Martin Luther King as a special holiday. The Field Foundation funded the Soviet spy ring, the Institute of Pacific Relations. The Field Foundation owned PM, a periodical that ran interference for the Soviet secret police. The Highlander-trained trilateralist Andrew Young is on the board of trustees of the Field Foundation. The executive director, Leslie Dunbar, who was also a co-founder with James E. Jackson, Jr. of the Southern Regional Council. The Field Foundation has contributed money to the Highlander Folk School, or Research and Educational Center as it is now called, and the NAACP. And please take special note to the Northern California American Civil Liberties Union. Also their monies go to the Institute for Policy Studies. The Institute for Policy Studies is, quote, the perfect intellectual front for Soviet activities which would be resisted if they were to originate openly from the KGB, according to the London Institute for the Study of Conflict. The field monies also go to the Fund for Peace, which funds the Center for Defense Information. Consultants have included Edwin Martin, identified in 1949 as part of a Soviet spy ring. 7. The Stern Foundation was began by Alfred Stern, who fled the United States to avoid prosecution as a Soviet spy. California Congressman Don Edwards lobbied on his behalf to have arrangement for his return. Other consultants to the Center for the International Policy were Harlan Cleveland and Orlando Gutierrez. Harlan Cleveland is a Rhodes Scholar, a fanatic for the dismemberment of the United States and the buildup of the United Nations and world government. He worked for Harold Glasser, a Soviet espionage agent. Harlan Cleveland called himself a socialist, founded the American Student Union, a communist front. Harlan Cleveland authored the book, quote, Third Try at World Order, always pushing for world government. Cleveland is the head of the insidious Aspen Institute's program on international affairs. The other consultant to the Center for International Policy, a branch of the Institute for Policy Studies, was Orlando Luthier. He was an operative for the Center of International Policy at 120 Maryland Avenue, Northeast Washington, D.C., which was also a spin-off from the Institute for Policy Studies. Orlando was an agent of influence for the Soviet KGB working under a Cuban case officer. He died in a bomb blast in Washington, and in his briefcase was a letter to the wife of the second-in-command of the DGI secret police, signed by Saul Landau. The Northern California American Civil Liberties Union featured Saul Landau at their 1983 program. We find that the Institute for Policy Studies programs parallels the activities of Soviet active measures. Saul Landau, whose letter was to go to the DGI agent's wife, was guest speaker for the Northern California American Civil Liberties Union. The Ford Foundation said that their purpose is, quote, to so alter the United States that we could be comfortably merged with that of the Soviet Union, unquote. Monies from the Stern Fund go to the National Lawyers Guild, the foremost legal bulwark of the Communist Party, and also to the Social Science Research Council, which funded Swedish Red Gunnar Myrdal's study, which concluded that the Constitution was, quote, nearly a plot against the common man. Of course, Carnegie and Ford's money went to this end product called the American Dilemma. The Constitution quite truly is in the way of a merger with the Soviet Union, thereby necessitating authorities to do away with it. And we find Gunnar Myrdal, true to the form of the Ford Foundation, after attacking American nationhood, backs global government. And that's what it's all about, world government, under the control of a few. The call for world government penetrates most movements. Here is a symbol combining the peace sign with the ecology movement. Earth Day just happens to fall on Lenin's birthday. Special groups involved with the One World environment will push proclamations to honor this day, Lenin's Earth Day, birthday. The Environmental Center in San Luis Obispo, like the Center for Nonviolence in Santa Cruz, and like the Highlanders Center, all act as a transmission belt for leftist and trilateralist party line material. Trilateralist Russell Train, former administrator for the Environmental Protection Agency, is president of the World Wildlife Fund, which is really a ploy to marshal the people truly interested in a healthy environment into advocates for Rockefeller's One World government. Russell Train for years has been working with Rockefeller to get the counties and cities in America to line up with the global world government views and to push one world, one race, one ruler, like Hitler's Ein Volk, Ein Reich, Ein Führer. A story about these systematic moves can be found in New Federalism by Anne Garney. If you're interested in local government at all, it's a must reading. The Environmental Center in San Luis Obispo, which is a transmission belt for Marxist materials, distributes the Livermore Action News, which again promotes disarmament of the United States. It features Ron Dellums, who's a co-founder along with Tom Hayden, Jane Fonda, and Cesar Chavez of the Committee for Economic Democracy. And it calls on people to think globally and act locally, pushing for world government. They also distribute a publication called Appeal to Reason and promote the Nonviolence Center in Santa Cruz County. It is funded by the Agape Foundation. We find that the Agape Foundation supports the War Resisters League. Its German affiliate in Europe is a front for the German Communist Party. The War Resisters League, according to its Win magazine, supports the Weather Underground. There is no way to understand what's going on in the community in which you live without understanding the source of the funds and the opinions and policies of those directing the monies. There is no way a person can understand domestic or international politics without being familiar with the Council on Foreign Relations and the Trilateral Commission. To think in terms of merely conservative and liberal, or to think in terms of Republican and Democrat, is to hardly think at all. Khrushchev and Stalin, just to be clear about the intent of communists, claim that they will bury us. The Soviet Union has killed 1,600 people per day since their revolution, which began killing not only the Tsar, but his wife and children. The head of the Communist Party for decades and presidential candidate Gus Hall has made it clear. He said, quote, "I dream of the hour when the last congressman is strangled to death on the guts of the last preacher. And since the Christians seem to love to sing about the blood, why not give them a little of it?" Angela Davis is his vice presidential candidate, is seen here being promoted at the Santa Cruz bookstore of Neil Coterny's Santa Cruz bookstore on Pacific Avenue in Santa Cruz. The American Communist president continues, quote, "Slit the throats of their children and drag them over the mourner's bench and the pulpit. Allow them to drown in their own blood and then see whether they enjoy singing about the hymns." This is a communist head in America that the communists rally around. Jane Fonda, sitting here in a North Viet Cong anti-aircraft gun, said, quote, "You would hope, you would pray on your knees that we would someday become communist," unquote. Years later, she said, quote, "I'm more profoundly committed to what I believe in now than in the days when I was considered a traitor," unquote. Walter and Victor Reuther trained over a year and a half in the Soviet Union, and from the Soviet Union they wrote back to America, quote, "Let no one tell you that we are not on the road to socialism in the Soviet Union," unquote. At the end of their letter they said, quote, "Carry on the fight for a Soviet America." Walter Reuther's United Auto Workers helped Tom Hayden in Newark 20 years ago by starting him off with $5,000 through the Economic Research and Action Project, an SDS front. The Communist National Guardian brags of Hayden's quiet organizing before the riots in Newark. Basically, it was tenant organizing. Tenant organizing is a successful formula for the leftists in dividing the people into radicals to gain elective office. Art Pearl is one such radical. Here on Bob Listner's property is a promotion for Art Pearl. Listner is a member of the black nationalist NAACP and provides sweetheart rent contracts for his left-wing friends. We find Carl Connolly, a member of the Republican Central Committee, who has delivered pro-Soviet lectures since his first trip to the Soviet Union in 1959, is coordinator for Pearl's campaign. Connolly is a director of the greater Santa Cruz Foundation dispensing trilateral monies. Connolly's major purpose is to prevent any real opposition to the Santa Cruz enclave, or sanctuary. This is Tom Hayden leading his SDS contingent in Chicago. Santa Cruz City Councilwoman Marty Warmhout was practicing the bullhorn in support of the communist terrorists and assassins in Grenada in October 1983. The Committee on the Judiciary of the United States Senate reported that documents reveal that the SDS Weatherman connections with foreign communist authorities is dedicated towards armed revolution. Let there be no mistake concerning the intentions of the SDS or the CED. It is symbolized by their hammer and sickle. Kathy Calfo and Tim Jenkins have been major contacts in Santa Cruz County for the CED. Tom Hayden, in 1980, when he ran for United States Senate, included even a red star on one brochure. Tom Hayden, Jane Fonda, Cesar Chavez, and Ron Dellums founded the Committee for Economic Democracy. They published the Economic Democrat. It was Tom Hayden that traveled with the theoretician of the Communist Party to Prague, Czechoslovakia, to Moscow, to Peiping, to Castro's Cuba, to Hanoi. Tom Hayden wrote the foreword to the communist book Mission to Hanoi. Economic Democracy is the World Government Handbook, a Mein Kampf to use and control the so-called anti-establishment. The foreword is written by an identified communist, and the author is a sponsor of the newspaper In These Times. And we remember the statement of Gaither Rowan that the Ford Foundation's purpose is to so alter the United States that it would comfortably merge with that of the Soviet Union. We see the Council on Foreign Relations Ford Foundation is the primary source of funds for this book and program. We find the old wealthy families supporting Marxism. Again, communism is not the people overthrowing the banking establishment, but the banking establishment enslaving the people. They use communism to kill competition. We find big money funding Hayden's tenant organizing. We don't find articles like the one reproduced here in the Dow Jones Sentinel. The top aide to Republican William Campbell in the state of California sent out applications to join the CED and endorsed a CED candidate in Sacramento County. The endorsement paid off. Tom Hayden's operative, Dave Shore, won the election by only 200 votes. And William Campbell is leading the Republican leadership in the California State Senate. And I suspect his top aide is still working for him. This country is being lost by people that are dying to be popular and are afraid of criticism. We find even conservative congressmen such as Robert Dornan pitching for federal funds for the pro-Soviets who use those funds for tenant organizing and promoting Marxism. The newspaper Communitas is a result of that congressman's error. The recipient of those funds is now in the Santa Monica City Council and responsible for its majority controlled by Tom Hayden. It's had access to the funds spent by that city for years. Note the address on Hill Street. It is the same address of the Liberty Hill Foundation. It is funded by Kerry Lowe, founded by a member of the National Lawyers Guild, the foremost legal bulwark of the Communist Party. Lowe was on the staff of Bela Abzug. Bela Abzug was the official representative in Prague for the IADL, a communist front. The New York Post noted she is generally, the New York Post noted she, quote, generally followed the Communist Party line, unquote. The CED, the Committee for Economic Democracy, receives money from a number of sources. We saw that the Agape funds the War Resisters League, whose German affiliate is declared communist. They also fund the CED. The CED receives funds from the New World Foundation. A trustee on that foundation is Council on Foreign Relations Vernon Jordan, who is also a trustee for the insidious Aspen Institute. The Limitor Fund also funds the Committee for Economic Democracy. They also fund La Raza and the Abalone Alliance of San Luis Obispo. Congressman Henry Gonzalez said of La Raza, quote, this is the work of a well-trained, highly educated cadre of young men who have patterned their speech, behavior, and intentions on the well-established procedures and tactics of the militant revolutionary in other sections of the country and of the world, unquote. Continue the quote. Some of them openly say that their symbol is Che Guevara and Castro, unquote, Congressman Gonzalez. The Fair Tree Foundation also funds the CED. Ron Dellums is on the foundation. The money comes from the huge Warner Brothers fortune. And the California Regent Stanley Steinbaum, who's a member of the American Civil Liberties Union. He was an integral part of the Ford-funded Center for the Study of Democratic Institutions in Santa Barbara. And as I said, Ron Dellums is on the board of directors of the Fair Tree Foundation. He's a founding member of the Committee for Economic Democracy. Another director of Fair Tree was Paul Jacobs, a former member of the Young Communist League and a self-admitted Trotskyite. He was an organizer for David Dubinsky's International Lady Garment Workers that supported the Communist Brookdale Labor College. Dubinsky was also a member of the Council on Foreign Relations and raised over $100,000 for the communist terrorists in Spain. So that you know what this is all about, many of the liberals and the socialists and communists supported the Republicans in Spain. As you can see, these liberals march in cadence with rifles, red stars, hammers, and sickles. The hatred of all religion is exemplified. The Fair Tree Foundation also funds Greenpeace, pulling in other people into the Marxist movement under the guise of ecology and peace. The Aspen Institute is one of the slickest granddaddies of them all. The Marxist seminars are pushing world government, number more than 25 a year, seminars at the Aspen Institute alone. It has recruited at least 11 members from the Santa Cruz Planning Department. Its chairman is Robert O. Anderson, a member of Rockefeller's Council on Foreign Relations. He's also the chairman of Atlantic Richfield. Richfield gave $25,000 towards the defeat of Proposition 13. Proposition 13 only said that before any new taxes could be raised, that the people would have to approve it. They don't want people approval. They want to dictate from the top. One United States senator said that the attorney for Atlantic Richfield has a, quote, record of deliberate, secret betrayal of the nation to its mortal enemy, the communist conspiracy, unquote. That attorney, John McCloy, is a trustee to the Aspen Institute. He was a former chairman of the Council on Foreign Relations and has attended a number of the super-secret Bilderberger meetings. Here he is receiving the Humanist Award from Robert Anderson. On the front page of the New York Times, April 18, 1959, a newspaper owned by a Rockefeller operative, Sulzberger, a CFR member, the newspaper said, quote, Premier Fidel Castro of Cuba denied today charges of a communist influence in his regime. In a speech before the American Society of Newspaper Editors, he asserted, quote, I have said very clearly that we are not communist. Our revolution is a humanistic one, unquote. A week later, agrarian reform started seizing the properties that belonged to the people. On July 15, 1959, the chief of Cuba's Air Force resigned and testified that Castro was the chief communist in Cuba and he was a member of the International Communist Conspiracy, unquote. The New York Times a day later, July 16, 1959. Herbert Matthews, New York Times, quote, This is not a communist revolution in any sense of the word. Castro is decidedly anti-communist, unquote. This is a reason why you can't trust the newspapers at all. It's absolutely necessary that you subscribe to several private newsletters and newspapers. The Aspen Institute was founded by Robert Hutchins, a graduate of Yale, the spawning grounds of the order. He was a director of the Ford Foundation, a member of the American Civil Liberties Union. He was a president of Rockefeller's University of Chicago. The University of Chicago, of course, was the pivot point for Russell Trains, the environmentalist trilateralist. Anyway, Robert Hutchins, this wealthy fanatic for world government, was the president of the committee to frame a world constitution. And naturally, they received Ford Foundation monies. As the Ford Foundation funds Gunnar Myrdal to come out with the Constitution as merely a plot against the common man, they also fund Robert Hutchins to come out with a world government constitution. The American people are being sold a line that is immense. Bilderberger, Robert McNamara, is seen here with the president of Aspen, Joseph Slater, who is also a member of Rockefeller's Council on Foreign Relations. It was, as you'll remember, the CFR Bilderberger, Robert McNamara, whose slick talking prevented Castro from being destroyed by Kennedy. So you have the New York Times, Sulzberger, Council on Foreign Relations, Rockefeller's group, telling us that Castro is not communist. We have Robert McNamara inside the White House, preventing Castro from getting crunched by John Kennedy. In fact, it was John Kennedy that kids killed by a communist assassin. Dr. Harlan Cleveland is director of the Aspen's International Affairs. Cleveland is a member of David Rockefeller's Council on Foreign Relations, and he's attended Bilderberger's secret conferences. Cleveland worked under Soviet spy Harold Glasser and founded the American Students' Union, as you'll remember, and Dr. Cleveland is a Rhodes Scholar. Here we have four people that are major sources of funding communism around the world. Robert McNamara of the World Bank, Baron de Rothschild, David Rockefeller. According to the Freeman Institute, Joseph E. Johnson is also a trustee to the Aspen Institute. Joseph E. Johnson is a Bilderberger, a member of the Council on Foreign Relations, and he succeeded Alger Hiss as head of the Carnegie Foundation. He authored a war plan to destroy the anti-communist South Africa, which is on the agenda of our city and county governments in this community. So we find the people in our community that think they are anti-establishment, carrying out the very programs that are hatched by the Rothschilds and Rockefellers and heads of the World Bank. Another training propaganda center that's set up for building a cadre to run the New World Order was opened up in New Mexico in October 1982. Armand Hammer is a man responsible for the industrializing of the Soviet Union. He sponsored the United World College. Armand Hammer's father was a founder of the American Communist Party. Armand Hammer lived in Moscow for over a decade. And Armand Hammer was Lenin's comrade and protected by special orders. In fact, the Cheka, which is the Soviet secret police, according to Armand Hammer's official biography, were instructed by Lenin to give him special treatment. With Robert Anderson of Richfield and Hammer under Ronald Reagan are being given billion-dollar contracts to build up the communist bloc with modern technology and slave labor to compete with the American people. Red China is being built up by global government advocates. Despite the ugliness of atrocities under communism, competition does not exist. It's a monopolist dream. Gulf Oil provides a majority of the revenue for the communist Angola. It is a staging area for war against South Africa. Despite the controversial policies of South Africa, it has much too big a middle class for the comfort of these elites. The Aspen Institute reaches into the Santa Cruz community, and its influence is screened and disguised, first through the Creative Initiative Foundation, headquartered in Palo Alto. It maintains recruitment houses in Portola Valley and has ties to Saul Landau's Institute for Policy Studies and Tom Hayden's Committee for Economic Democracy, and an outfit called the Uni-World League, which is always pushing for UN and world government. And as do all Rockefeller groups, because it threatens his oil monopoly, they oppose nuclear power. And that, my friends, is why the opposition to nuclear power is so heavily funded by the elite. Wells Springs and Ben Lomond is networked with Humboldt and San Francisco. It is believed to be building an underground railroad network for terrorists. It has extensive facilities and expensive facilities. Several murder suspects were pursued by the police in the 1980s. The police discovered even secret passages designed for escape for people where there is hot pursuit. The Wells Springs property is next to the Aspen front called Sequoia Springs in Ben Lomond. The fanatics and terrorists are used by the elite. Jim Jones left his belongings to the Communist Party after distributing his Guyanese grape. Here in the newspaper it shows just another axe slayer for peace from Bonnie Doon, who was a supporter and organizer for the New World Liberation. William French Smith, Reagan's Attorney General, is allowing virtually full freedom for the terrorists inside the United States. Here, demonstrating in front of the FBI building, fugitive terrorist Marilyn Buck and terrorist Judy Clark openly demonstrate, even with active indictments. Marilyn Buck is believed to be involved in the Capitola bank robbery here in Santa Cruz County and linked with several terrorist groups organizing in this area. Communist SDS International Secretary Bernadine Doran said before the Weatherman faction, quote, dig it. First they killed those pigs, then they ate dinner in the same room with them, then they even shoved a fork in the victim's stomach. Wild, unquote. She was referring to the Bianca murders. Manson was part of the London-based Satanist cult known as The Process. Upon arrest, Manson called two attorneys, Lawrence Steinberg and George Shebley. Both are members of the National Lawyers Guild, the foremost legal bulwark of the Communist Party. The Communist Party journal New World Review helps to promote Citadel Press, which is a key supplier of publications pushing Satanism and witchcraft. The West Coast official communist publication is A People's World that has wide distribution in Santa Cruz County. The more effective distribution of Marxist and Institute for Policy Studies materials is through the Pacific News Service, which filters through the university paper, The City on the Hill. The paper also directs action or activities through the Nonviolence Resource Center, one of the major Marxist transmission belts in the Monterey Bay Area. The paper also directs action or activities through the Nonviolence Resource Center, one of the major Marxist transmission belts in the Monterey Bay Area. In 1982, the control of the Santa Cruz Sentinel slipped, and it went to the Ottawa newspapers, which is now controlled by Dow Jones. Just some of those Rockefeller operatives at Dow Jones are Robert Jones, Charles Myers, Richard Wood, and power trilateralist J. Paul Austin, who heads Coca-Cola. The Dow Jones Sentinel in October carried two pup articles about Common Cause, making them out like they're protecting the citizens against the abuse of big business. What the Sentinel didn't tell you is that the founder of Common Cause is John Gardner. Like Alger Hiss, was head of the Carnegie Foundation. Also like Hiss, was a member of Rockefeller's Council on Foreign Relations. And Common Cause has received money from IBM, the Ford Motor Company, Chase Manhattan Bank, the New York Times, Kuhn Loeb & Company, David, Nelson, Lawrence, Martha, Stephen, and Mr. and Mrs. John D. Rockefeller III also contributed money. So much for the objectivity of Dow Jones-owned Sentinel. The Sentinel also featured a story about Patricia Schroeder. They failed to say that she has been to Cuba before and been to the Soviet Union before. They mentioned that her companions, Jane Podesta and Lonnie Carter, belonged to the WILPF. WILPF? And just how many of the people in the community know what the WILPF means? They don't expect you to know, they don't want you to know. The community needs a newspaper independent of the Council on Foreign Relations and trilateral censorship. The WILPF is the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom, a member of the World Peace Council, quote, the Soviet Union's single most international front organization, unquote. In the United States, there are over 25 million Americans over 65, many distinguished and capable of writing the seniors column. The holding company, Dow Jones, which is synonymous with Wall Street, and the editor, Bruce McPherson, who deliberately prevents vital information from getting to its readers, chose Claude Pepper as writer for their senior column. Newsweek and Time have called him Red Pepper. The Saturday Evening Post, Pinko Pepper. The U.S. News said, quote, Pepper is a foremost advocate of Russian policy, unquote. It would take hours to relate the service that Pepper has provided to the communists in Russia. He has written for an outfit what our Congress says is, quote, specializing in pro-Soviet propaganda. Exactly the Dow Jones, Bruce McPherson type person for this county. I suspect Jack Hillis of the Grey Panthers votes him a lot. In Congress, Claude Pepper's staff included Charles Kramer, a member of the Ware and Furlow Soviet spy rings. He was liaison between the two. Another person on Claude Pepper's staff was Frederick Weber, who is believed to have arranged a meeting between Silvermaster, the head of the spy ring in our government, and the Polish ambassador. Claude Pepper's staff person protested the appearance of Madame Tatiana Tacharabian at the University of Virginia. She and her husband were the first to escape from a Soviet slave camp. Do you think that Dow Jones and local editors at the Sentinel really are that dumb? This is a mystery man for now, a major supporter of the Soviet bloc. As you know, a paper can lie by omission and commission. During the time you see this film, you could have read a newspaper complete. The newspapers have the advantage is that the advertisers pay for it 365 days a year, full of opinion, fact, and data. No one individual can withstand a sustained campaign of smear and disinformation. The thinking people of the community must be alert and be able to read between the lines. The Sentinel molds opinion and is pushing for Rockefeller's world government. Occasional endorsements to satisfy the small businessmen in the community don't compare to the continued insidious propaganda that is used and worked day in and day out. In a report issued by the Committee on the Judiciary of the United States Senate entitled Extension of Subversion in the Left, it said that the SDS was in the process of going underground and in constant communication with communist regimes, and that those regimes supply anti-U.S. propaganda and operatives for use of their literature and speeches and demonstrations. The Venceremos Brigade is one example of the numerous contacts between the operatives and foreign communist governments, unquote. The Santa Cruz Peace Brigade is patterned along the same lines. It has been reported that Mike Rotkin was an SDS member and that his hero is anarchist Emma Goldman. Lenin said that the majority of anarchists think and write about the future without understanding the present, and that's all that divides the communists from them. The man whose name was Leon heard Emma Goldman at one of her lectures. He shot the American president, William McKinley. This poster is a good indication that the communists and anarchists do unite for bloody revolution. The CNT in the upper left is the Anarchist National Confederation of Labor. Marty Wormhout of the Santa Cruz City Council during the Grenada invasion, just like the SDS Tom Hayden, picked up the bullhorn. Marty directed hundreds in protest in order to protect the communist terrorists that seized the island of Grenada. They were building an airfield capable of accepting Soviet bombers. The communist New Jewel movement was directed by DGI agents. 56% of the oil that travels to the United States come more than 500 miles of Grenada, striking distance of only MiG-23s. Secret documents have been found showing North Korea and the Soviet Union were using it as a staging area, and that they fanned spies throughout the Caribbean and into the United States. It comes as no surprise that Communist Bettina Apteker, the daughter of the chief theoretician of the Communist Party, Herbert Apteker, endorsed Marty Wormhout for city council. Tom Hayden was the campaign manager for Communist Herbert Apteker. And this is all under the last several decades. Gus Hall, the one with the quotes about slitting children's throats, has been ahead of the Communist Party. Grenada, since the seizure by the communists in 1979, has never had an election, nor has Cuba, nor has Nicaragua. So much for your human rights. The hypocrisy of it is amazing. Gary Patton, member of the County Board of Supervisors, months before, was promoting the communist terrorist base in Grenada. Gary Patton was well aware that a communist Cuban transmitter was installed broadcasting messages from the TASS news agency and the communist Prensa Latina. Gary Patton knew months before that a full Soviet general, Sachenev, was an ambassador to that tiny island, and that Cuban intelligence officer Julian Rizzo was made ambassador. A lot of brass for a tiny Caribbean island. Gary Patton was instrumental in spending Santa Cruz taxpayers' funds for a voter drive. Valley Oak was incorporated by Tom Hayden's CED operative Hendrik Kibble. After spending over $10,000 to register voters Hendrik Kibble is now listed with identified communists and others that frequently traveled to the Soviet Union in support of Jane Weed. Jane Weed was on the staff for 3 years to the Chief Marxist Transmission Belt operation in Santa Cruz County, the Resource Center for Nonviolence. As we saw earlier, the Center for the Support of the Communist Terrorist in Central America is located on Pearl Alley in Santa Cruz. The overt support of the Sandinistas come from the mystery man we mentioned earlier. The Soviets and Cubans are now on the Pan-American Highway in Nicaragua. Submarine pins and missile bases are now being installed, aimed at the jugular of America. Just as the Abraham Lincoln Brigades supported the communist Republicans in Spain, the Santa Cruz Peace Brigade was contrived at the Resource Center, the transmission belt for Marxist propaganda. The brigade was welcomed by the communist Sandinistas, according to Mary Dunfield. Mary Dunfield runs the Planetary Citizen program and is pushing frantically for world government. She indoctrinates school children on her sailboat. Herb Seal is a member of the Planetary Citizens organizing in Australia. It has been rumored that Herb Seal is the reference in the book I Never Told Anyone by Ellen Bass as possibly the one that belongs to the Renee Guillen Society, the Sex by 8 or else it's too late theme. Planetary Citizens was founded by Norman Cousins, a member of David Rockefeller's Council on Foreign Relations. A coalition supporting communist terrorism in Central America hides behind the word peace. The coalition includes the National Lawyers Guild, the Resource Center, the Fellowship of Reconciliation, the War Resisters League, whose affiliate in Europe is declared communist, Gary Patton's American Friends, the Women's League for Peace and Freedom. Here, Free's organizer is seen with KGB officer Yuri Koprolov. In addition to Patton's support for Marxist expansion in Central America, the mystery legislator, instrumental in diverting millions of dollars to transfer the Panama Canal, on which we now see Soviet ships loaded with munitions destined for the communist Sandinistas and spreading terrorism throughout the Americas. As in Spain, their communist clenched fists give them away. The communist hatred of religion included killing the clergy. The destruction of religious symbols, such as a firing squad shooting at the statue of Christ. Surprisingly, the representative from Moral Majority, Cal Thomas, said that their program included the defense of Israel. No other country in the world was a part of their special concern. El Salvador, the only country named for Christ, translates means our Savior, is on the red chopping block. I suggest a broader policy for moral majority. Even though El Salvador had free elections in 1982, Leon Panetta campaigns for the communist terrorist. Leon was instrumental in divesting of the United States of the Panama Canal. He voted for millions of dollars in aid to the communist Sandinistas, who have never held an election since they seized power. So there is no question as to the direction these terrorists are going. Venceremos was a call of Che Guevara, and that is the name of the bookstore at Casa on Pearl Alley. They support communist terrorists now, today. The Dow Jones never told you, but there is an outfit called Peace Through Law. It was founded by Marcus Raskin, who together with Richard Barnett founded the Institute for Policy Studies, the IPS. Here is Richard Barnett with Avril Harriman. Harriman is a member of Rockefeller's Council on Foreign Relations and of the Skull and Crossbones, the Order. The London Institute for the Study of Conflict, called the Institute for Policy Studies, the perfect front for the Soviet activities which would be resisted if they were to originate openly from the KGB. The IPS also has offices in Amsterdam and in London. They get monies from the Fabergé fortune, the Samuel Rubin Foundation. In 1935, the Comintern directed operatives to unite with others to form a quote-unquote popular front to achieve an era of communist respectability. Secret Communist Party members were told to openly enroll. Communist on the voter rolls for the election year of 1936, Samuel Rubin was one of them. The Institute for Policy Studies is funded by the Rubin Foundation. The Youth Project is a conduit for Counter-Spy magazine and is funded by the Institute for Policy Studies. Members of Peace Through Law include Ron Dellums, one of the founding members of Tom Hayden CED, John Conyers, Robert Drennan, and Leon Panetta. All are left-wing attorneys pushing for world government and American disarmament. Robert Drennan was a featured speaker for the National Lawyers Guild, the bulwark of the Communist Party. Drennan suggests that the American lawyers, quote, be compelled to work for world government, unquote. And this man is the vice chairman of the United World Federalist pushing world government. That's what it's all about. To destroy the United States and to build world government, that we never do anything militarily unless it's multinational. The Peace Through Law group that Leon Panetta belongs to financed a film called War Without Winners, a film that opposes American civil defense programs. The director of the film, Haskell Wexler, in 1975 produced a propaganda film for the terrorist Weather Underground organization, which included interviews from the not yet captured Kathy Bodine, which showed direct access to the communist underground. Red Chinese agent Dennis Cassini Weatherman, Mike Cullen, and Mike McHale were joined with Arthur Bremer at an SDS meeting in 1969 in November. July 71, Bremer is in a meeting with Michael Cullen of the communist SDS. Cullen is part of the Milwaukee 14 with important communist connections. 60 days after the shooting of George Wallace, Dennis Salvador Cassini was found dead in a parked car in Toronto, Canada. Among the phone numbers he carried with him was Viola Edwards in Dallas, who associates with Black Panthers and arranges disappearances, and Mike McHale, the SDS enforcer, and also Lebo Bergman, who is a founder of the Revolutionary Union in California, specializing in firearms and explosives and assassination. That's California. An SDS terrorist is suspected of robbing the bank in Capitola. Wells Springs has already been used to conceal people wanted by the law. The Loudon Nelson Center is reported as a contact center for Cuban and American Black Liberation networks. The California Homemakers at 24 Front Street in Santa Cruz is part of Western Service Workers Association, which is headquartered at 16667 7th Street in Oakland. And they use charity to spread Marxism among the needy and believed to be a cover for hardline Marxist activity. After Soviet-trained assassin Lee Harvey Oswald, a member of the Fair Play for Cuba, killed our American president, Oswald gave the communist clenched fist salute. On November 26, 1963, the official communist newspaper The Worker suggested that the Chief Justice be appointed to investigate this assassination. 3 days later, Johnson did just that. Bring home the war is the communist cry. The communists killed 66 million of their own in China, 1 in 3 in Cambodia, and it goes on with genocide in Southeast Asia, Afghanistan, and in Central America today. Tom Hayden's call for power to the people was not original. Lenin coined it. Peter Collier, a journalist and acquaintance of Tom Hayden, wrote, quote, Tom Hayden announced it was time to form a new communist party, replete with an underground. Democratic centralism, the works. Collier in the New West article said Tom Hayden wanted America to have its own national liberation front and, quote, create small enclaves in liberated territory which guerrillas units could sally forth and return as if it were a sanctuary, unquote. Santa Cruz, I believe, is close to becoming that enclave or that sanctuary. The so-called peace symbol is superimposed with the communist clenched fist. The emblem was selected by one of the first teachers of the Fabian Socialist School in England, Bertrand Russell. You'll recall the Fabian selected the wolf in sheep's clothing. The symbol has been used by the occult and the Nazi SS, the so-called peace symbol. The Soviet delegate to the United Nations, Dmitry Manuelsky, taught at the Lenin School of Political Warfare in Moscow, said, quote, war to the hilt between the communist and the capitalism is inevitable. Today, of course, we are not strong enough to attack. Our time will come in 20 to 30 years. To win, we will need the element of surprise, and the bourgeoisie will have to be put to sleep. So we shall begin by launching the most spectacular peace movement on record. There will be electrifying overtures of unheard-of concessions, and the capitalist countries, stupid and decadent, will rejoice to cooperate in their own destruction. They will leap at another chance to be friends, and as soon as our guard is down, we will smash them with our clenched fist. So here it is, folks, a spectacular peace drive. Endorsements from the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom which belongs to the United States Peace Council. Mike Myerson, its head, sits on the National Council of the Communist Party, USA. The Pajarón Federation of Teachers, the AFL-CIO. The national head is Lane Kirkland, also a member of David Rockefeller's Council on Foreign Relations, and also the Rockefeller Foundation. Jack Hillis is the head of the Gray Panthers, and those groups located on Pearl Alley that support the communist terrorism in Central America. The agency Food and Nutrition practices one of the dirtiest Pavlovian tricks on our country's needy. They distribute literature in Spanish and English following the Soviet active measures party line. They attempt to turn the needy against the United States government and to use them as pressure to force disarmament in the face of Soviet global expansion. Most of the material they distribute are outright lies. It is paid for by your city and county and federal taxes. You, the taxpayers, are paying for it. Supervisors like Patton, city councilmen like Rotkin, congressmen like Panetta are all looking the other way. They are the beneficiaries. And the county district attorney is so timid as to be silly. It's time a grand jury looks this way. Sam Karp is a Marxist intimidator who is pushing this anti-American propaganda using federal funds to the needy via the taxpayers. Karp was also involved in supporting the March on Sacramento, again that was using taxpayers' money. Most of the people you see out in the streets and the marches and so forth are people involved there to resolve some abuse found in society. What they don't know, they themselves, that they are being manipulated to surrender their rights and to push for world government, which is a blueprint of the powerful hidden establishment that they think they are opposing. Unfortunately, the fact is, and history shows, that it takes only a small percent of hardcore Marxists or revolutionaries in order to break the fabric of society and to fill that vacuum. America today is the biggest obstacle to world government. And we find those people that are working wholeheartedly for world government are doing what they can to strip America of its wealth and to send it part and parcel overseas. The UN is the trap. In 1939, Rockefeller's Council on Foreign Relations crafted the World Government Policy Papers for the State Department for the building of the United Nations. And of course, it sits on Rockefeller property. Guess who's going to run it? Post-war Foreign Policy Report, 1950, named 17 key people who were responsible for the assembly of the United Nations. It's a government document. Of those 17, 16 were Soviet agents. The In These Times newspapers is sponsored by identified communist, socialist, and Marxist and many other politicians that are sustained by the Ford Foundation and Rockefeller and CFR monies. Important conduit, important network. Paul Jacobs was a sponsor until he died. He was a Trotskyite, a member of the Young Communist League, and the organizer for David Dubinsky's International Ladies Garment Workers. The supporter of Brookdale Communist College and $100,000 to the communist terrorist in Spain, member of the Rockefeller CFR, the War Resisters League, the NAACP, was a trustee for the Fund for the Republic, which was headed by Robert Hutchins, the founder of the insidious Aspen Institute. Another sponsor of In These Times is Julian Bond, who was brought into town by black extremist Jimmy Meredith Griffin and the UCSC contact Dr. Herman Blake. Julian Bond is a board member of the pro-communist the Communist Highlander Folk Research and Educational Center. He says he is for community socialism, but participates in communist foreign politics. Julian Bond is on the national board of the American Civil Liberties Union. Another sponsor of In These Times is Derek Shearer, who wrote the foreword for Tom Hayden's Economic Democracy, their Mein Kampf. The leftist Mein Kampf was funded by the billion-dollar Ford Foundation, of which Robert McNamara Bilderberger, member of Rockefeller's Council on Foreign Relations, a trustee for the Ford Foundation. The foreword to the book is written by an identified communist and is referred to in the book is referred to in Santa Cruz as the Communist Secret Agenda. We'll be getting to Santa Cruz. This is deliberate. Another sponsor of In These Times is Daniel Ellsberg, a Harvard graduate. He held a scholarship from Pepsi-Cola. Don Kendall, the head of Pepsi-Cola, is a member of the Ford Foundation funded East-West Accord. Daniel Ellsberg worked for Bilderberger McNamara. He was a research institute at MIT. He was close friends of McCloskey, McGovern, and Hugh Van Tye, who spent 5 years with Ho Chi Minh. Member of Rockefeller's Council on Foreign Relations, he's a promoter of the War Resisters League, admires Martin Luther King and Gandhi, was affiliated with the Carnegie Foundation. He chose Leonard Bodine for his attorney, the father of Weatherman Kathy Bodine, and he was honored recently in New York by a group of attorneys, including communist spy Alger Hiss. We could go through every one of these sponsors and find that they're hardcore and heavy duty, like Dorothy Healy is a district organizer for the Communist Party in California. Let us get to Monterey Bay. In Santa Cruz, in the back of a business center, sits a tiny office at 3029 Porter in Soquel. Porterfield and DeLacy Consultants, it says on the window. DeLacy is also listed as a sponsor of In These Times. He and Dorothy Baskin, former communist organizer in Missouri and Colorado, live at 5320 Lynn Haven Road in Soquel. Ann Steinhardt of Good Times, a paper in Santa Cruz, ran a puff article about Hugh DeLacy. It didn't mention that DeLacy and Professor Gunlick recruited Thane Sumners for the Communist Abraham Lincoln Brigade, similar to the Peace Brigade formed in Santa Cruz. Sumners, according to his father, was indoctrinated by Ralph Gunlick and DeLacy and died fighting with the communists in Spain. Ralph Gunlick was an important contact of the San Francisco Soviet Council in charge of espionage activities, according to page 231 of the 6th report of the California Fact-Finding Committee. In the Good Times profile, it fails to say that identified communist DeLacy threatened a Washington state legislator for wanting to quit the Communist Party. According to the testimony, Hugh DeLacy said, "We made you and we'll break you," unquote. Government reports say DeLacy, quote, devoted virtually all of his time to the operations of the Communist Front organizations and spreading communist propaganda, unquote. DeLacy belonged to the American Committee for Democracy and Intellectual Freedom, which a fact-finding committee says, quote, followed the Communist Party line as it switched and squirmed in support of the foreign policy of Soviet Russia. This is the same Hugh DeLacy that is supporting Jane Weed for City Council, along with the CED head Kathy Calfo and Tim Jenkins, who organized the Marxist New American Movement in Santa Cruz. The New American Movement was engendered and created by In These Times, this newspaper. Tim Jenkins is now Henry Mellow's legislative aide. Jane Weed is receiving support also from Peter Klotz Chamberlain from the Resource Center, who just returned from many stops in communist Eastern Europe. DeLacy was a member of the Committee for a Democratic Far Eastern Policy, which was set up to aid, quote, the removal of the impediment in the path of communist domination by undermining General MacArthur and quoting attacks against him, unquote. In addition to DeLacy, in this communist organization, was Herbert Apteker, Tom Hayden's traveling companion, Agnes Smidley, who was arrested by the Chinese officials at the request of the British secret police, who claimed she was a Comintern agent. She later became involved with Richard Sorge, who was executed for heading a Soviet spy ring. She traveled with Mao Zedong and Zhou Enlai. De Lacy's friends set up 2 Soviet spy rings, one in Peiping and one in Tianjin. De Lacy's friend Agnes Smidley wrote for the Institute of Pacific Relations, which was funded by Rockefeller, General Electric, and Carnegie. The Senate Internal Security Subcommittee said, quote, "The Institute for Policy Studies has been considered by the American Communist Party and by the Soviet officials as an instrument of communist policy, propaganda,
should be
and military
Institution
intelligence."
of Pacific Relations.
De Lacy's name is, of course, on the list of supporters supporting Gary Patton for county supervisor. De Lacy was part of the Bill of Rights Conference, along with John Abt, a member of the Ware spy ring. Ralph Winlock, the man who with the KGB contact with the San Francisco consulate. Also a member was the Scott Nearing, a founding member of the American Civil Liberties Union, who said he was a communist. And Communist Harry Bridges of the Longshoremen's Union. And Alfred Stern, the man who fled to the Soviet Union to avoid prosecution, were all part of this particular conference. These were De Lacy's associates. De Lacy, in October 1983, put in a recommendation to the Santa Cruz personnel for Ann Turner to be the chief county librarian. The information was also given to Bruce McPherson about De Lacy's background, and also to Reese Davis of the county bank, part of the Friends at the Library. To our knowledge, there has been no information given to the public, so the public remains uninformed after giving materials to the newspaper. A small, courageous weekly newspaper would be a wonderful antidote to the county of Santa Cruz. A special celebration was held at the Loudon Nelson Center. It wasn't covered by the Sentinel either, even though there were quite a few people there. It was in honor of Hugh De Lacy for his battle for social justice and for his wife's work as a communist organizer in Colorado, and for her support of the communist terrorists in the Spanish Civil War, and for De Lacy as an advocate of progressive politics. So now we know what progressive politics is all about. Those celebrating and those putting in an appearance were Marty Warmhout, Leon Panetta, Mike Rockin, Gary Patton, John Laird, Bruce Van Allen, Joe Couture, Helen Garvey, George Stavis, director of the Loudon Nelson Center, and Dan Bessie. You'd think with that collection that the newspapers might report it. Dan Bessie, according to government reports, was training communist youth for leadership in the party while living in Santa Monica, California. Dan Bessie has shared a platform with the presidential assassin Lee Harvey Oswald as co-chairman for Fair Play for Cuba. A fact-finding report said that Alva Bessie, his father, is mentioned as one of, quote, a very accurate list whose purpose it was to set up an espionage system for helping Soviet Russia, unquote. Hugh De Lacy was vice chairman of the Constitutional Liberties Information Center to oppose internal security. You can see why. Their P.O. box was rented by Robert and Helen Travis. Travis was the treasurer of this organization. De Lacy was vice chairman. Helen wrote for the Daily Worker under the name of Maxine Levy. She transferred $3,700 to a money drop in Mexico City in an effort to release a Stalinist agent who was imprisoned for the murder of Leon Trotsky. The Travis couple, after this event, traveled to the United States giving speeches for Communist Red China, one of Leon Panetta's preferences. Leon Panetta said on UCSC radio he would choose Red China over Free China, and received in October 1983 an award from the American Civil Liberties Union. Roger Baldwin was one of the founders of the American Civil Liberties Union, along with William Z. Foster, one-time head of the Communist Party. The ACLU, Roger Baldwin said, quote, "Communism is the goal," unquote. Congratulations, Leon, you deserve the award. The local newspapers continue to deny the readers of background information on their community and their country. It is vital to subscribe to several private newsletters or publications that are willing to give you the facts. You may live your whole life and not know what's going on around you. The attacks will come on anyone who is opposing world government. Here are a few final items. Henry Mellow's aide, Tim Jenkins, was the organizer for the New American Movement, which was engendered by In These Times. In Santa Cruz, according to the local attorney, a number 2 contact for Tom Hayden's CED. Here we see Senator Mellow with Esther Hagler of the International Ladies Garment Workers, of whom Paul Jacobs, the Young Communist League organizer, was an organizer. The Council on Foreign Relations head of the union funded the Communist Brookdale College and sent monies to communist terrorists. The present head of the union is the super wealthy Sol Schlatkin, a member of David Rockefeller's Trilateral Commission and Council on Foreign Relations. Joe Crouchman, like Bob Lesnar, like the Bob Lesnar-supported Art Pearl, are running for school board. Both are involved in rent control and tenant organizing. That's Tom Hayden's favorite means to power. Crouchman has penetrated and videotaped conservative audiences, including Soviet defector Ioffe, in true reconnaissance fashion. A preliminary version of this presentation was shown before the Organization of United Taxpayers. A man stood up in outrage and defended William Fulbright, a Rhodes Scholar, whom I never mentioned, and Henry Kissinger, who I've never mentioned, and John J. McCloy, who, a United States Senator, had a record of deliberate secret betrayal to the Communist conspiracy. He I did mention. The Senate Banking Committee, according to the 1974 report, said 5% ownership of a widely held public corporation is considered tantamount to control. Rockefeller interests own 10% of Exxon. For some reason, Douglas McConnell, the man who invited other people to leave this meeting, has had his property tax on Via Palo Alto sent to the Exxon Corporation, headquarters in New York since 1976. So the man disrupting the meeting has a direct connection to David Rockefeller's Exxon Corporation, where his taxes are sent. John D. Rockefeller said, "Competition is a sin. The trilateralists, the order, use communism to kill competition in order to set up their monopoly." In our own county, Don Reagan, Merrill Lynch is buying up real estate offices. Rockefeller's Citibank is taking over Fidelity Savings. And trilateralist J. Paul Austin's Dow Jones now owns the local newspapers. Consolidation and world government is what it's all about. Ein Volk, ein Reich, ein Führer philosophy that they've adopted. It has been discovered that Hawk International, Boyson, have been sending to David Rockefeller information on a candidate opposed to Leon Panetta. Leon Panetta had been said to be a possible choice for vice presidents by Bilderberger and member of the Council on Foreign Relations member Walter Mondale. Boyson, the Hawk International head, approached a local gun store owner saying that he could expedite an automatic weapons license and implied that the amount of business from him would make it worthwhile. One can only guess if those automatic weapons were destined for leftist terrorists in Central America, or to the terrorist groups that are wanting to build a enclave or sanctuary in Santa Cruz, as Tom Hayden's acquaintance said, or whether it's just all circumstance. Those wanting to see the 2-hour showing of the KGB activities in North America, contact the person showing this presentation. If you want to know what the 007 Downing was all about, ask for a copy of an analysis. It was deliberate. The 2 films produced by Congressman Ashbrook and Larry McDonald, called The Subversion Factor, are an absolute must viewing. If you care to join Impact and make a monthly commitment, we're going after Tom Hayden and the Trilateralist. Any organization that discounts or doesn't mention the Trilateral Commission or the Council on Foreign Relations and returning their government to sanity is not worth your support and is a waste of time. And never, never,
Never, never give money to the Republican Party or the Democratic Party, only to individual candidates, otherwise it'll be used against you. That's the story. That's a brief, very rough thing. The first time that the data and the slides have been even halfway matched, but the content, I think, is there that you can appreciate and is worthwhile to get to you immediately, and that's why you're seeing it in this version. And of course it will be refined. One or two items will be double checked that there's some doubt about. A bunch of it is very hard, very solid evidence and data. And I do need some help. I do need some money, not only to do this project, but another one that I'd rather talk to you personally about. And let's go get them. Let's make a difference. We're on the edge of history. Let's get in the middle of it.